Good afternoon and welcome to Lunchtime live on Radio Gibraltar. The Spanish airline Volotea announced a twice-weekly flight between Bilbao and Gibraltar starting in July. The news was welcomed locally, being the first link between Spain and Gibraltar in more than a decade. Remember that Gibraltar was excluded from the EU Single Skies aviation measures and has, in any case, now left the EU. So questions were raised as to the legal basis of the Bilbao-Gibraltar air route. Well, the government said it knew of no impediments as to why the flights couldn't proceed, but the very next day, Volotea announced that the flights would not proceed as it had not acquired the relevant permits. Well, the government and opposition have since been engaged in a protracted argument through various press releases about it, and I have the main protagonist here in the studio with me. You may have already heard him. It's the Minister for Business, Tourism and Transport, Vijay Daryanani. Can you hear me now,
Good
Minister?
Afternoon, Good afternoon.
And also his opposition counterpart, Damon Bossino from the GSD.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for coming in today. Right, Minister Daryanani, let's get straight down to it. First of all, you said that the potential UK-EU treaty over Gibraltar could offer a legal basis for this flight. And then you said there's the Chicago Convention. You told us in an interview that you knew of no impediments as to why the flights couldn't proceed. And you said that you'd had lots of messages from people congratulating you about the route. But the very next day, and I remember it was the 1st of April because people thought it was an April Fool's joke, Volotea said it was suspending tickets as the airline didn't have the necessary permissions. Now, it's all been a bit of a fiasco, hasn't it?
Well, I disagree entirely. It hasn't been a fiasco at all. I think, first of all, we need to realize that the fact that Volotea want to fly to Gibraltar, this is the first time in, I think, perhaps 12 or 13 years that we've had interest from a Spanish airline wanting to operate a flight to Gibraltar from a Spanish city. That in itself is a huge success. It shows that the government is continuously working in trying to attract new airlines, is continuously working in trying to attract, to open up new routes, and this is exactly what it was. Let me just go into a little bit of, perhaps for the umpteenth time, I want to explain how when a airline wants to operate out of Gibraltar Airport, the procedure. I mean, they need to make an application to the Gibraltar government, which Volotea did. We gave them permission to fly to Gibraltar Airport. Then they came back to us a week or so later, and they said that they would like to announce the route, and asked me for a quote, which is customary that they should do so from the Minister for Tourism, and that is how we proceeded. And I have here with me the press release that Volotea released, not the government of Gibraltar, but the airline themselves, in which they announced the route. And it says Volotea to connect Gibraltar Airport to Bilbao.
Did you not speak to them, though, about the legal framework for the flight, knowing, as you did, that we'd left the EU and we weren't included in any aviation measures before that? Did that not cross your mind?
No, it's not a question of whether it crossed my mind or not. It's the responsibility of the airline to apply for these permits. They did so with Gibraltar. So if they did so with Gibraltar, they also did with the civil aviation authorities in Spain. But then after that, they've always said that when they start off a new route, they don't need to apply for a permit, or they tend to get one anyway. So that is what they thought would happen with Gibraltar. Simple as that.
Okay.
It wasn't the responsibility for us to go and apply for a permit for them. It was they had to do it.
But before we go to Mr. Bossino, I just want to say that you announced the flight, or you talked about the flight in your interview with GBC after Volotea had already made the announcement. But the fact is that you said that you had assumed afterwards that they had the necessary permits, but since there's been no flight between Gibraltar and Spain for over 10 years, do you think you were wrong to make those assumptions?
Well, no, it's not a question of me making those assumptions. It's the assumptions were made by the airline. The airline made the announcement of the route. So they are in the business of starting off new routes, and they thought that they would be getting the relevant permits. Okay. We gave them the permission to fly to Gibraltar Airport. That was what we had to do.
Okay, let's go to Mr. Bossino now. Mr. Bossino, the minister has explained the situation. Bit unfortunate that they didn't get the permits. Are you not making a mountain out of a molehill out of this?
No, absolutely
Some
not.
political goal scoring, maybe?
No, absolutely not. It is our role as an opposition. One of our roles is to question and expose the government when they have failed. And there is absolutely no doubt in our minds and in my mind that the government has committed an incredible and massive faux pas with regards to this particular issue. And the fact that, they are now playing, with granular issues as to who made the announcements or didn't make the announcements, the Chronicle reported in its headline, and the government, made no issue about it then when it was all good and positive news that they were bringing a new airline and a new route to Gibraltar, and it's coming from Spain and all the rest of it. The Gibraltar Chronicle very clearly reported that it was a joint announcement by the airline and the Gibraltar government. But I don't want to entertain issues like that, which quite frankly are issues of semantics. It's issues of semantics. The minister said he couldn't hear and he needs to listen to me now. And needs to keep quiet and calm down a bit. Because the reality is that he has been caught out, that this is another blunder by him. We had it with Linewell Road when he went ahead and made this policy statement that Linewell Road was going to be pedestrianised, and said to one of your interviewers outside of Number 6 when he was asked whether it would happen, and he said very confidently then that Linewell Road would happen. And then only a few months later to be dropped, the project and himself, quite frankly, to be dropped like a hot brick by the chief minister. So I think what we need here is a bit of humility by the minister. I think what we need here is a bit of acknowledgement by the government that they got this wrong, apologise to the people of Gibraltar that they got this wrong, and then move forward. But we're not seeing that. What we are seeing is press release after press release where they have gone into personal attacks on me, talking about my leadership ambitions and stuff like that, which is wholly and utterly irrelevant. But of course, the minister, what he's doing is taking a page out of his boss's book, the chief minister, and that's his skill.
Okay,
he does that, he confuses, he obfuscates, but he doesn't answer the basic point, that they got this wrong, they should say sorry, and then we move on.
Let's give the minister a chance to reply to that.
Look, Mr. Bossino has seized upon this this issue like a one-trick pony. It's the one thing that he's talked about it's the only thing that he's talked about since the 2019 elections.
That's incorrect.
And if he's happy with that,
that is
that's
factually incorrect.
But let me just say, if I may,
let's stick to the
no
issue.
government has done more for tourism than this government has done.
We can talk about that afterwards, but let's just talk about Volotea before we do move on to the wider issues of all the other airlines you've attracted to Gibraltar, Mr. Daryanani. Mr. Bossino says that an apology is due from the government. What's your feeling on that? Will you apologise?
There's nothing to apologise about. I'm sorry, because this project is not dead. This project...
talked about, let me just ask you about the Chicago Convention, because you talked about that as being a possibility, but as though it was an easy thing to just go to the Chicago Convention and get a pass or something. But I mean, if that was at all possible, why hasn't that been achieved in the past 10 years?
Well, first of all, when we talk about the Chicago Convention, both sides need to agree on an airline, on an air route to take place. Look, it's the airline's responsibility to go to their side and say, look, we want to fly to Gibraltar, and can we do so? That hasn't happened from their part. They are waiting to see how things develop with the...
Do you still think the Chicago Convention is a possibility for European flights?
For both, if both sides agree, that is how the Chicago Convention works. It is only if both sides agree will something like that happen. It's not that if Gibraltar wants it, or it's got to be both sides. So putting that to one side at the moment, insofar as Volotea is concerned, and what the airline is hoping for now is that there might be like I said, in the talks of the deal, the Schengen deal, then there might be a possibility that aviation is included. So if aviation is included, then there wouldn't be an issue. But I think that is what the airline is waiting to see.
Yes, I think also there is a possibility that there isn't going to be a draft agreement of the treaty by the end of June. Chief Minister has indicated that could be extended. We don't really know at this stage what the future lies, how the future lies ahead. But you've heard the minister's reply to your comments. Mr. Bossino, would you like to come back on that?
Well, look, it's very unfortunate, and he's only digging the hole which he already has dug for himself even deeper. What he should be doing now is apologizing, as I said before, and acknowledging that this was an error, and let's move on. He hasn't done so. What he's done is precisely what I said a few minutes ago. What he does is personally attack me and say that this is a one-trick pony for me and that I've made no comments, no political comments since the election of 2019. That is absolutely and utterly incorrect, and it is wholly denied by me. I have made many points and political points both in Parliament and outside of it over the last almost 2 years. But this is typical of him, and it is typical of this government. They go for the messenger, despite what was it the chief minister used to say before he became chief minister? Play the ball and not the man. This is precisely what they do. This is precisely what they were doing in opposition, and they carry on doing now.
It has become
quite
personal.
And he also makes rather, typical of him. He makes rather bizarre and sweeping statements which he cannot back up. Like, for example, the one we've just heard, that this government, that no other government has done as much for tourism as this government. I mean, that's completely and utterly absurd, and it cannot be justified in a reasonable, objective basis.
Let's move on from Volotea, because it's very clear that there's not going to be an apology for that. It has all gotten very personal.
Precisely.
Talk about that afterwards. In terms of what the government has done, I mean, you have introduced some new airlines. I mean, obviously, COVID has stopped those from happening, but we're expecting the Edinburgh route to resume, the Wizz Air flights, etc., etc. Can you justify your comments to what you've just said about how this government has achieved more in terms of tourism? Can you justify what you were saying?
Like I say, only since for the last 6 months we've announced a new airline with Wizz. We've announced Eastern Airways with 2 routes. We have this interest from Volotea. I want to caveat that because I don't want to upset Mr. Bossino. It's disappointing. It's disappointing.
It's reality.
It's disappointing because
and it's a disaster.
It's really disappointing because, I mean, he doesn't understand the damage that he does every time he comes out with a pointless press release, because all these press releases are absolutely.
It's what the opposition does, though. It holds the government to account.
This is not holding the government to account. This is clutching at straws. I mean, they like to think they want to make themselves feel relevant because they're simply not.
Okay, Mr. Bossino,
and it's disappointing. They do it at the expense. I mean, Ros, I need to make this point because they do it at the expense of Gibraltar. They do it at the expense of the hard work that we are putting in to make sure that we can kickstart the economy.
This has come up in the press releases. So let's just tackle this. Mr. Bossino, I mean, it's amazing, all these new flights to Gibraltar. It shows incredible interest in Gibraltar.
The only one who's not amazed.
And the UK press is touting Gibraltar as a great holiday destination, all very positive things. The minister says your continuous negative press releases are damaging. What's your response to that?
Look, he's. I was going to say it's shocking that they made that statement, but actually it isn't. It isn't because it's true to form. It's not true to form of Mr. Daryanani. It's true to form of him and also of the government he's a member of. They used to do that when they were last in government between 1988 and 1996. If there was a criticism, if there's ever a criticism of any GSLP administration, then they always respond, and the retort always is, if you criticize me, I mean, they act as if they were tin pot dictators. If you criticize me, you criticize Gibraltar because you're damaging to Gibraltar. That is absolute and utter rubbish.
Do you think there's a way that the public, because the public are probably listening to this and thinking, this has turned really, really personal and doesn't really serve the Gibraltar to have its politicians take these matters so personally. Is there any way we can keep it at a professional level and just deal with the issues rather than the person?
But that's precisely the point I make. And my criticism of him in his replies by way of press release, and they've done it in relation to other issues that we've raised recently, like, for example, in relation to the vaccination program, in relation to housing, in relation to the customs union. They always sort of go and attack the individual who's making the statement on behalf of the opposition. I am the first one, and my colleagues are the first individuals who will say, let's debate the issues. Let's not make this personal. And I want to make this absolutely clear as well. As far as I'm concerned, and I'm sure I can say with an element of confidence, that as far as Vijay and Mr. Daryanani is concerned, it will not affect our sort of personal friendship, which we do hold. This we do because we are paid by the Gibraltar public to do this job. And I think, as far as I am concerned, and as far as my colleagues in opposition are concerned, we are doing the correct thing, which is to call them to account and to scrutinize them and to expose them when they do wrong. And he has to do his job, for which he gets paid handsomely.
Mr. Daryanani, I know you might want to respond to that, but can I just ask you about some questions that I know the public are desperate to hear about? The air corridor, for example. We've all been vaccinated in Gibraltar. Any idea when that air corridor is going to open? And also the whole business of testing. Yes, the UK is recommending Gibraltar as a holiday destination, but testing is so incredibly expensive here and in the UK, even more so in the UK. So is there any end in sight to those kind of expenses?
I think the airline industry is suffering immensely. And now they have realized that the main cost is testing, because there are different arguments out there. There are arguments that if you've been inoculated, then why is there the need to test? Then there are the different types of tests. There's the PCR test, which is more expensive. Then there's the lateral flow test, which is cheaper. Different countries are asking for different requirements. So I think everything is still up in the air. I mean, we know that the UK government want to introduce this traffic light system, which will allow on the green, amber and red sort of system, and where Gibraltar hopefully would be on the green side, and then you could travel to the UK without having to quarantine. But there's also the testing.
Yeah, very expensive.
It is very expensive, but as you know, that the UK have realized that, and therefore they are speaking to the companies that carry out these testings to reduce their prices. And I think that is important, and I think that is key in how successful travel would be this summer.
Okay, Mr. Bossino, I mean, what's your view on this? I mean, what needs to happen? Because unless something is done with the immense cost of testing, £210 for 2 tests in the UK, and that's only one person. So you can imagine if you're a family of 4, our tests in Gibraltar are £50. Again, one person is fine, but if you're a family of 4, that's another huge expense. What do you think needs to happen, really? How are we going to navigate? You were talking about the new Indian mutation that is now causing concern. How do we start to come out of this vortex?
Yes, I think, but before I answer that question, which it's a very difficult question to answer, let me add, I must say that I know we're probably going to the end of this debate, but the minister's replies in relation to Volotea, if I could just go back to that for a moment, because it raises a wider issue about how he handles applications and interests which are expressed by airlines from outside of Gibraltar to fly to Gibraltar. It gives me actually greater cause for concern than comfort, because it seems that he almost leaves the basic due diligence aspects, like, for example, do you have a permit to do this, Mr. Airline, to the airline itself. But then he's quite happily jumps on the bandwagon and throws himself in the pool before knowing whether it's got water in it, and announces jointly with the airline that a new flight, a new route is happening. But in answer to your question, the reality is that it is so much in the air that we simply don't know. We were all, when I mentioned to you that Sky News, it had been reported to me on my walk up here from the office that Sky News had reported that there's an Indian double mutation virus which has arrived in the UK, and it is apparently highly dangerous. We all sort of gasp, saying, oh my goodness, are we going to go back to square one? But that's where we are. Why? Only, half an hour ago we're thinking it's over. Gibraltar's done really well in terms of the vaccination program. We're in a really good place. The minister is absolutely right that we should be considering, doing stuff with the UK and making sure, as far as possible, that Gibraltar is a green lighted jurisdiction to which people can travel. In that sense, I think we all accept that Gibraltarians are very entrepreneurial and will see an opportunity. I mean, it sounds horrible saying that in this context, right? But the reality is that we may have a window during summer months where Brits want to come to Gibraltar, and that's something we need to exploit. But again, it's so much in the air, and the issue of costs.
We've come to the end of our time.
Have we? Sorry.
I'm so sorry, Mr. Bossino.
No, that's fine.
Before we go, I am going to put this thing to the minister, this thought to the minister. With all these airlines coming in, and your endeavours to market Gibraltar, isn't it a good thing that Sir Peter Caruana had the foresight to build a big airport that Gibraltar can be proud of? That's not something the government has ever admitted. Would you care to admit it today?
Absolutely.
Well, I don't know. I mean, about admitting. I mean, it's a question. Look, it was the decision taken by the then Chief Minister to build the airport. He built it with, if we're starting to work, it's taken maybe 12 years before we can actually make use of it, and still there's 1 million people that can pass through that terminal. We're nowhere near that.
Okay, very quickly, your last point.
Yes, I mean, I'd just like
we have to
go back to Mr.
Very
Bossino.
quickly,
I think,
because
yes,
the time's up.
I think people are tired of his defeatist brand of politics. The GSD are tired, they're uninspiring, and they're desperate to make themselves
You
feel
guys
relevant.
are on your way out.
All Mr. Bossino, is
10 seconds.
to wait for an opportunity to dance one more pirouette.
Yes,
he's above.
Carry on reading the
This
notes.
is going to continue. I'm sorry, this will continue off there.
I've yet to hear a
but
positive.
But we do
That's
have
not
to
true.
hand
That's
over.
also not true.
I'm going to turn your mics off in a second. We do
Okay.
need to hand over to Ben Lynch, who is taking over the captain of the ship at 2:00 now, as the clock strikes 2 on Radio Gibraltar 91.3 and 92.6 FM, while Spanish is on Radio Gibraltar Plus. Gentlemen, thank you very much, both of you, for coming in.
Well, hopefully
Thank
Vijay will
you.
give me a lift
Thank you.
down.
I wouldn't count on it.